Wild bear enters a village and does something so incredible that it leaves the entire town stunned. They found Sarah Mitchell's tiny footprints in the snow, leading straight into the den of the largest bear ever seen in Pine Grove. But what the search party discovered there would shake their small mountain town to its core and forever change how humans and wild creatures viewed each other. Some called it a miracle, others a sign. But no one who witnessed what happened that freezing February morning would ever be the same. The morning had started like any other in Pine Grove, a sleepy village nestled in the Cascade Mountains. Wisps of wood smoke curled from stone chimneys, and the early February frost coated the evergreens in crystalline white. Sarah's mother, Emma Mitchell, had just finished packing her daughter's lunch for school when she realized the unusually quiet house meant trouble. "Sarah?" Emma called out, her voice echoing through the empty rooms. The back door stood slightly ajar, letting in a whisper of cold air. Sarah's bright purple backpack still hung on its hook, but her snow boots were missing. Emma's heart dropped. Sarah had been begging to build a snow fort before school all week, but Emma had insisted they wait for the weekend. Now the fresh snowfall had proved too tempting for the second grader to resist. Within hours, the entire village of Pine Grove mobilized into a search party. The local rangers, led by veteran woodsman Jack Thompson, organized groups to comb the forest. Temperature forecasts showed an incoming storm front that would drop well below freezing by nightfall. They had precious little time. "She couldn't have gone far," Jack assured Emma, though his furrowed brow betrayed his concern. "These woods can be disorienting in the snow, but we'll find her." What Jack didn't mention was the increasing number of bear sightings in the area. An unusually mild winter had kept some of the local black bears from fully hibernating, and just last week, rangers had found massive tracks near the village outskirts, far larger than any black bear they'd ever documented. As the sun climbed higher, the search parties spread wider. Emma joined Jack's group, her voice growing hoarse from calling Sarah's name. The snow, which had seemed so magical that morning, now felt like a cruel blanket smothering any signs of her daughter's passage. By mid-afternoon, the first flakes of the predicted storm began to fall. The wind picked up, causing the pine boughs to creak and groan. Jack was about to suggest they regroup at the ranger station when a distant sound caught his attention. Not Sarah's voice, but something else. Something that made his blood run cold. A deep, resonant bellow echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking branches. Jack immediately reached for his rifle, but Emma was already running toward the sound, maternal instinct overwhelming any sense of self-preservation. "Emma, wait!" Jack called out, but his words were lost in the strengthening wind. As Emma crashed through the underbrush, the sounds grew louder. Then through a gap in the trees, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. There, in a small clearing, stood the largest bear she'd ever seen. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall on its hind legs, with thick brown fur frosted with snow. But it was what the bear was doing that caused Emma's world to tilt on its axis. The massive creature was gently nudging something with its snout, a small figure in a pink winter coat, half buried in snow beneath a fallen tree. "Sarah!" Emma's scream tore from her throat before she could stop herself. The bear's head snapped up, its dark eyes meeting Emma's. In that eternal moment, Emma saw something in those eyes that defied everything she'd ever believed about wild animals. Intelligence, yes, but also something that looked remarkably like concern. Then, to Emma's astonishment, the bear began to dig. Not aggressively, but with careful, deliberate movements, its massive paws clearing away the snow around Sarah's trapped form. As Jack and the other searchers finally caught up, they could only watch in stunned silence as the bear continued its rescue effort. It took several minutes, but finally the bear stepped back. Sarah lay unconscious but breathing, her small body protected from the worst of the cold by the very snow that had trapped her. Later, doctors would confirm that this snow cave, likely created by her fall and the bear's initial digging, had actually helped preserve her body heat and prevent severe hypothermia. As medical personnel rushed forward to attend to Sarah, the bear backed away, its mission seemingly accomplished. It paused at the edge of the clearing, cast one more long look at the humans gathered there, and then melted away into the forest like a spirit. Sarah would make a full recovery, but this was only the beginning of Pine Grove's extraordinary tale. The bear's actions that day would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only how the village viewed its wild neighbors, but also how they understood their own place in the natural world. And as Emma Mitchell sat by her daughter's hospital bed that night, listening to Sarah's first whispered words about her fuzzy angel, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps there was more magic in these mountains than anyone had ever imagined. The story of Sarah's miraculous rescue spread through Pine Grove like wildfire, but it was what happened 3 days later that truly left the townspeople questioning everything they thought they knew about wild animals. Sarah had just returned home from the hospital, still wrapped in blankets and drinking hot chocolate, when Emma heard an odd scratching at their back door. The sound was gentle but deliberate, almost like knocking. When she peeked through the curtains, she nearly dropped her coffee mug. There, sitting patiently on their back porch like an oversized dog, was the same massive bear. "Jack," Emma whispered urgently into her phone. "It's back. The bear. It's at my house." But before Jack Thompson could arrive with his ranger team, Sarah had already toddled to the window. The moment she saw the bear, her face lit up with recognition. "That's my friend," she exclaimed. "The one who sang to me." Emma froze. "Sang to you?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "When I was cold and scared under the tree, he made humming sounds until I wasn't scared anymore. Like a lullaby, but growly." The bear remained perfectly still on the porch, its breath creating small clouds in the cold air. What struck Emma most wasn't its enormous size, though that was impressive enough, but its eyes. They held the same intelligent, almost gentle expression she'd witnessed in the forest. When Jack arrived, he found Emma and Sarah sitting on one side of their glass door, with the bear calmly waiting on the other. It hadn't made any aggressive moves, hadn't tried to break in. It was simply visiting. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife management," Jack muttered, lowering his tranquilizer gun. "Bears don't behave this way. They don't make social calls." But this bear was different. Over the next few hours, it remained on the porch, occasionally making soft huffing sounds that seemed to make Sarah giggle. She claimed she could understand what it was trying to say, though the adults remained skeptical. Word spread quickly through Pine Grove, and soon a small crowd gathered at a safe distance from the Mitchell house. Among them was Dr. Helena Chen, a wildlife biologist who'd been studying unusual animal behaviors in the region. "There have been documented cases of wild animals forming bonds with humans," Helena explained to the amazed onlookers, "but nothing quite like this. This bear displays signs of what we'd call social intelligence, behavior typically seen in animals like dolphins or great apes." As the day progressed, something remarkable happened. The bear began bringing things to the porch. First, a bundle of fresh pine branches, then, more surprisingly, Sarah's missing mitten from the forest. Each item was carefully placed at the door, like offerings. "It's a gift-giving behavior," Helena observed, frantically taking notes. "This is unprecedented." But the most extraordinary moment came when Sarah, despite her mother's protests, began drawing pictures and holding them up to the glass. The bear would study each one intently, tilting its head in a way that seemed almost human. Then came the drawing that changed everything. Sarah's artistic rendition of her time lost in the woods. When she held it up, the bear did something that left even the skeptical Dr. Chen speechless. It raised its massive paw and gently touched the glass exactly where Sarah had drawn herself in the snow. As night fell, the bear finally rose and ambled away into the forest, but not before giving what looked remarkably like a nod to Sarah. The little girl waved goodbye as if saying farewell to an old friend. That night, Emma found Sarah's drawings scattered across her bedroom floor. Among them was a new one, a child's interpretation of a massive bear with what looked like a crown of stars around its head. At the bottom, in wobbly second-grade handwriting, Sarah had written, "Some angels have fur instead of wings." But this peaceful encounter was just the beginning. None of the Pine Grove residents could have predicted how their unusual visitor would soon test the bonds between human and animal, civilization and wilderness, in ways that would make them question the very nature of consciousness itself. And as Emma tucked Sarah into bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that their bear was trying to tell them something important that would soon change their lives forever. The real question was, were they ready to listen? The third visit changed everything. It came on a night when the northern lights painted the sky in sheets of green and purple, and what the bear brought with it would force Pine Grove to confront a truth far stranger than anyone could have imagined. Emma was awakened by Sarah's excited whispers at 2 a.m. "Mom! Mom! He's showing me something important!" When Emma rushed to her daughter's room, she found Sarah pressing her hands against the window glass, her breath fogging the pain. Outside, illuminated by the ethereal aurora, stood their ursine visitor. But this time it wasn't alone. Arranged in a perfect circle around the bear were objects that had no business being in the forest. A battered first aid kit with a Forest Service logo from 1983, a rusted compass that still pointed true north, and most incredibly, a weathered journal bound in cracked leather. Dr. Helena Chen arrived within the hour, her scientific skepticism battling with undisguised wonder. "These items," she breathed, examining them under bright lights, "they're all from missing hikers, cases that went cold decades ago." The journal belonged to Dr. Marcus Fleming, a renowned wildlife biologist who had vanished in these mountains 40 years earlier while researching unusual animal behavior patterns. His last recorded notes spoke of something extraordinary he'd discovered in the high caves, something that would change our understanding of consciousness itself. But it was what they found pressed between the journal's pages that caused Helena's hands to shake. A series of detailed sketches showing bears displaying impossible behaviors, using tools, arranging objects in geometric patterns, and most incredibly, what looked like attempts at communication through symbol arrangements. The final entry, dated just before Fleming's disappearance, read, "They're not just intelligent, they're awakened, and they've been trying to reach out to us all along." As Helena read these words aloud, their bear, now nicknamed Guardian by the village children, did something unprecedented. It began arranging pine cones in the snow, moving them with deliberate care until they formed a pattern that made Sarah gasp. "It's the same as my drawing," she exclaimed. And indeed, there in the snow was a crude but unmistakable representation of the crown of stars Sarah had drawn days earlier. Jack Thompson, who had initially been the most skeptical of Guardian's unusual behavior, was the first to make the connection. "The northern lights," he said slowly, "they're strongest right now, during this solar maximum. And look at the dates of all these recovered items. They're all from years when the aurora activity peaked." Helena's eyes widened as she flipped through Fleming's journal. He noticed it too. Every instance of advanced behavior he recorded coincided with intense auroral activity. "It's as if the lights wake something up in them," Emma finished quietly. But Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up with the simple clarity of a child. "They're always awake," she said. "The lights just help them show us." Guardian rumbled softly in what seemed like agreement, and then did something that left them all speechless. It reached out with one massive paw and began to trace in the snow. The movement was careful, deliberate, and what emerged was unmistakable, a crude but clear drawing of Pine Grove's main street. At its center was the old mining museum, and Guardian's claw had drawn an X beneath it. "He wants to show us something," Sarah said with certainty. "Something important." Dr. Chen was already pulling up geological surveys on her tablet. "The old mining tunnels," she breathed. "They run all through these mountains, and the main shaft starts under that museum. According to these records, the deepest tunnels were never fully explored because they were too dangerous. But—" She stopped, staring at Guardian with new understanding. "You know what's down there, don't you?" The bear's eyes, reflecting the shimmer of the aurora above, seemed to hold ancient secrets. But as they would soon discover, what lay beneath Pine Grove was only part of a mystery that stretched back far longer than any of them could have guessed. And time was running out to uncover it. Because in the distance, the first rumbles of spring avalanches were beginning to echo through the mountains, and with them would come a threat that even Guardian might not be able to protect them from. Sarah pressed her hand against the window one more time, and Guardian matched it with his paw on the other side. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We'll help you tell your story." None of them slept that night, as the northern lights danced overhead and the ancient secrets of Pine Grove stirred in the depths below, waiting to be found. The Pine Grove Mining Museum had stood empty for decades, its dusty displays of fool's gold and rusty pickaxes serving as quiet reminders of the town's frontier past. But on this particular morning, as dawn painted the snow-capped peaks in shades of rose and gold, it became the center of the most extraordinary expedition in the town's history. Dr. Helena Chen led the small group through the museum's creaking doors, her headlamp cutting through decades of dust. Behind her came Emma and Sarah Mitchell, Jack Thompson, and Mayor Gloria Chen, no relation to Helena, who had insisted on witnessing whatever they might discover. Guardian, their Ursine guide, waited outside, watching intently through the museum's front windows. The main shaft entrance should be, Helena consulted her tablet, right beneath the prospector's diorama. It took all five of them to move the heavy display case, revealing a trapdoor that hadn't been opened since the museum's conversion in the 1960s. The air that wafted up from below carried the mineral smell of deep earth and something else. Something older. "Mom," Sarah whispered, gripping Emma's hand. "It's singing." The others couldn't hear anything, but they'd learned to trust Sarah's unusual connection to things beyond normal perception. Jack went first, testing each rung of the ancient ladder that descended into darkness. The others followed, their headlamps creating overlapping circles of light in the gloom. The main tunnel was surprisingly well preserved, its timber support still solid after all these years. But it wasn't the tunnel itself that caught their attention. It was the walls. At first glance, they appeared to be covered in standard mineral deposits. But as Helena moved closer, she gasped. "These aren't natural formations," she breathed, running her fingers over the crystalline patterns. "They're arranged, deliberately." The patterns spiraled and interconnected, creating complex geometric shapes that seemed to catch and reflect their lamplight in impossible ways. Mayor Chen, who had been skeptical of the whole venture, reached out to touch one of the formations. "They're warm," she said in disbelief. A deep rumble echoed through the tunnel, not from below but from above. They rushed back to the entrance shaft to find Guardian had somehow managed to squeeze his massive form through the museum doors. The bear stood at the top of the shaft, and for the first time, they heard what could only be described as speech-like vocalizations coming from its throat. Sarah's eyes widened. "He says we need to go deeper, before the big snow comes." Helena checked her phone. The Weather Service just issued an avalanche warning. A major storm system is moving in faster than predicted. They pressed on, following Guardian's directions as interpreted through Sarah. The tunnel began to slope downward, and the geometric patterns on the walls grew more complex, more deliberate. Then they entered a chamber that changed everything. The cave opened up into a vast circular space, its walls covered floor to ceiling in the same crystalline patterns. But here they were clearly not random. They formed images. Bears, humans, stars, and symbols, none of them recognized, all arranged in a spiraling narrative that wound around the chamber. "It's a library," Sarah said simply, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Guardian's people have been keeping it for a very long time." Dr. Chen was already photographing everything, her hands shaking with excitement. "This predates any known North American cave art by thousands of years. But these patterns, they're not just art. Look at how they're arranged. It's mathematical. These are equations, star charts, genetic sequences." A low grinding sound interrupted her. Part of the chamber wall was moving, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, bathed in a faint blue luminescence, stood a single crystalline column. Within it, suspended like insects in amber, were dozens of small objects. Ancient arrowheads, colonial-era coins, modern microchips, and most surprisingly, a smartphone that had gone missing just last month. They've been collecting them, Emma realized. All this time, they've been gathering pieces of human progress, preserving them. "Not just preserving," Helena said, her voice filled with awe. "Studying, learning. These bears, they're not just intelligent, they're scientists, historians. They've been observing us, just as we've been observing them." But before they could process this revelation, Guardian let out a warning growl. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and a fine dust of rock and snow drifted down from above. The avalanche was coming, and they were about to discover that what they'd found was both a treasure and a terrible responsibility. Because somewhere in this ancient archive lay the key to saving not just Pine Grove, but perhaps the delicate balance between two species that had been secretly entwined for longer than anyone had imagined, and they had less than an hour to figure it out. The first tremor hit like a freight train, sending cascades of dust and pebbles showering from the chamber ceiling. Guardian's roar echoed through the cavern, but this time it wasn't just a warning, it was a call, and something answered. From deeper tunnels came responding growls, and suddenly the chamber was filled with bears. 5, 10, 15 of them, each as massive as Guardian, their eyes gleaming with the same uncanny intelligence. They moved with purpose, positioning themselves around the crystal column in a pattern that seemed practiced, rehearsed. "They're protecting it," Sarah whispered, but Helena's eyes had gone wide with understanding. "No," she breathed. "They're activating it." The bears began to vocalize in harmony, their deep, resonant tones making the crystals vibrate. The patterns on the walls started to glow, pulsing in rhythm with their sounds. Each bear touched the central column with one paw, and the suspended objects inside began to emit a soft blue light. "It's not just a collection," Helena said, her scientific skepticism crumbling in the face of the impossible. "It's a record of every major leap in human consciousness. Every time we've evolved our understanding of the world, they've been guiding us, nudging us forward, preserving our progress." Another violent shake interrupted her. Chunks of ceiling crashed down around them, but where they should have hit, they encountered invisible barriers of force, deflected by something emanating from the glowing crystals. Sarah stepped forward, drawn to the column. "They're asking for help," she said. "They can't complete the circle without us." Emma's protective instinct warred with her trust in her daughter's connection to these creatures. But before she could decide, Sarah had already placed her small hand on the crystal column. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The blue glow intensified, and the crystalline patterns on the walls began moving, flowing like liquid light. Images formed in the air around them, generations of bears and humans intersecting again and again throughout history. Cave painters working side by side with gentle giants. Native Americans sharing counsels with seated bears. Early settlers being guided to safety by massive shadows and snowstorms. They've been the guardians of human knowledge, Helena realized. All this time, they've been ensuring our progress wasn't lost, keeping safe what we discovered until we were ready to understand it again. The chamber shuddered. Above them, the first major avalanche had started, but Guardian and his kin never flinched, maintaining their circle as the crystal's power grew stronger. "The bears didn't just find these caves," Mayor Chen said suddenly. "They built them as a shelter for all of us." As if in response to her words, the ceiling crystals flared brilliantly. The rumbling of the avalanche grew to a deafening roar, but inside their crystalline sanctuary, they remained untouched. Through the natural skylight high above, they could see tons of snow and rock cascading past an invisible dome of energy. When the avalanche finally ended, Pine Grove above would be forever changed. But it would still stand, protected by technology so advanced it seemed like magic, preserved by beings who had watched over humanity's progress for millennia. In the days that followed, the world would struggle to comprehend what was discovered beneath Pine Grove. Scientists flocked to study the crystal technology. Historians rewrote their understanding of human development. And in the process, humanity had to accept that they had never been alone in their journey toward consciousness. But perhaps the most profound change was the simplest one. In Pine Grove, it became common to see bears and humans working together openly at last. Guardian remained a frequent visitor to the Mitchell house, where Sarah would often be found reading books to him, sharing humanity's stories with a being whose kind had helped preserve them for so long. And on clear nights, when the northern lights dance above the mountains, visitors to Pine Grove might see an unusual sight. Bears and humans gathered together at the museum, sharing in an ancient communion of knowledge and understanding that bridges the gap between species. As for Sarah, she grew up to become a pioneering researcher in interspecies communication. But she never forgot that cold February morning when she first met Guardian, and how a child's simple acceptance of the extraordinary had helped unveil one of the world's greatest mysteries. Because sometimes the most profound truths come not from what we discover, but from what has been watching over us all along, waiting patiently for us to be ready to understand.